Wow, it's good to be back after 2 weeks off. Thank you. I understand Reverend Karen had you all rolling in the aisles with her mini-series on joy and laughter. In fact, last week I heard something about Groucho glasses or something. It gives you a pretty good idea of what things are like at our house most of the time, because we do indeed practice what we preach. Groucho glasses for everyone, including the dog. And I tried to take a picture, but she wouldn't sit still for it. But trust me, it was funny. And it's Father's Day. And in honor of Father's Day, I'm going to do something this morning, pretty much the same thing that I did for Mother's Day, because I figure, what is it they say? What's good for the goose is good for the gander. So we're going to start things off in honor of Father's Day with my top 10 list of things that your dad would never say. Are you ready? Things your dad would never say. So here we go with number 10. Mom and I are going on vacation next week. Now would be a great time to plan your party. No, never heard that one. Okay, number 9. Well, how about that? I'm lost. Better stop and ask for directions. Of course, now you have a GPS, and what's dad without his gadgets, but still, probably wouldn't hear that. Number 8. You lost your report card? Not to worry, those things are totally overrated anyway. Number 7. I noticed that all your friends have a certain up-yours attitude. I like that. All right, number 6. No son of mine is going to live under my roof without a nose ring. Now, quit whining and let's get over to the mall. Or wherever it is that you get nose rings. I have no idea, but anyway. Number 5. Midnight is such a lame curfew. Why don't you make it 2 a.m.? Never going to happen. Number 4. Do these jeans make my butt look big? I don't think so. Number 3. What do you need a part-time job for? I make plenty of money for you to spend. Number 2. My one word of advice: ties. A man simply cannot have enough brightly colored strips of cloth to wrap tightly around his neck. So for those of you who got your dad a tie for Father's Day, just understand, you're perfect. And here we go with number 1. Honey, you really should consider dating a biker. They have the best ideas for tattoos. All right. With apologies to David Letterman and dads everywhere. Well, I suspect a lot of you, or maybe some of you, were probably wondering what I was up to while I was back at Unity Village for a week. And it's something that I do 2 times a year. And although it's really great to go back and reconnect, and it's great to go back and stay on the grounds at beautiful Unity Village, it's not a vacation. One of the things that our Unity Worldwide Ministries does is to license and ordain Unity ministers. And I lead the team that evaluates our students who are studying at Unity Institute, and we make recommendations regarding ordination or not. And we have 24 ministers on this team who are divided up into smaller teams of 4. This last time, just 2 weeks ago, we interviewed 25 students. Each student gets 2 interviews with 2 different teams, which means that we put in a couple of 10 to 12-hour days just to make sure that everything works. So, definitely not a vacation. But it does have its rewards in a lot of other ways. You know, our goal is to make sure that everyone we recommend for ordination has the skill set and the consciousness to go out and be able to lead a thriving ministry in the field. And becoming ordained is a rigorous process. Our students, they receive a Master's of Divinity degree. Now, this degree is currently non-accredited, but it's going to be fully accredited in somewhere around 3 to 5 years. And accredited or not, these students do graduate level work at Unity Institute. And I'll tell you, one of the most rewarding things about serving on this team is getting to go back year after year, twice a year, and just see firsthand how our students come into this program and then blossom as ministers and then go out into the world to lead other Unity Centers just like this one. It's an amazing thing. And something I've noticed over the past 10 years, and something that they verified this last time, is that the students in our ministerial program at Unity Institute are getting younger and younger. For some reason. I think the average age now is in the early 30s. There are several students there who have young families, and I would invite you today, as you go into Manning Hall, to notice the poster that's on the bulletin board on your left as you walk in there. Those are photos of our students who are studying at Unity Institute. So take a look at them, get to know them, and remember to hold them in prayer, because they are going through a transformational experience, and they're going to be coming out into the world to really lead the next generation of Unity students. And that's a really, really important thing. I always look forward to going back and listening to the students and their enthusiasm, and I also like going back and getting a chance to talk to the faculty members at Unity Institute, because that's where all of the new ideas are coming from. That's what our new ministers are, those are the people that our new ministers are learning from and taking it out into the field. Change is good. I know we don't like to hear that, but change is good. Would you please affirm that with me this morning? Together. Change is good. In fact, change is essential. It's inevitable, which is why it's so important for us who have been out in the field for a while to keep up with what's new in Unity and to understand that things change. And working on this team gives me a great opportunity to do that. You know, we owe a lot in Unity. We owe everything really to Charles and Myrtle Fillmore, our co-founders, who got things going. However, we can't be content to just stand on their shoulders, because after all, Myrtle, she died in 1931 and Charles died in 1948, and as we all know, a lot has happened in the world since then. New discoveries, new ideas, and if we don't keep up, we're not going to be around for the long haul. Now, Eric Butterworth is a Unity minister and best-selling author that I've talked about many times, and I know a lot of you are very familiar with him. He helped to update Unity for the generation that followed the Fillmores. And I like what Eric Butterworth has to say on this subject, something that we dare not forget. Eric said that a religion, to be a contemporary influence, must be redefined for every generation in the light of that day's thought. That's some wise advice going forward. And Eric, he made his transition in 2003. So, the question is, who's next? What's next? Who's going to help us to keep redefining Unity for the next generation, and what's that going to look like? Well, guess what? We're the ones. We're a part of the process. A few years ago, our Unity Worldwide Ministries went through a process of reflection, I guess call it reflection and renewal. And it was designed to keep us moving, to keep us from becoming complacent, and to challenge us to do what Eric Butterworth suggested, to redefine our teachings in light of what it is that we know today. And one of the results of this process is the tagline that I'm sure you're all very familiar with now, the one that we use to describe Unity the most, this one here. A positive path for spiritual living. That's the one that resonated with over 2,400 people who were surveyed as a part of this process. A positive path for spiritual living. Which goes to prove something that I think everyone here has probably suspected or known for a long, long time, which is that people are tired of all the negativity. And I don't care whether it comes from our political process or sometimes even worse from our religious leaders, people don't want to hear negative messages. They don't want to hear that they're damaged goods or that there's no hope. They don't want to hear that they're despicable sinners who have to grovel and beg a jealous God not to toss them into the lake of fire because they coveted their neighbor's Cadillac or didn't go to church often enough or stuff like that. So we continue to offer an alternative to those kind of negative messages. And we have to be careful not to let our focus on the positive get carried away or misinterpreted or misused. And I think that's a growth area for the movement. I've talked before about something that we call metaphysical malpractice. And there are several examples of that, but one of the examples of metaphysical malpractice is when we say things like, what was it that was in your consciousness that brought that illness, or that accident, or that investment loss? You fill in the blank. What was it in your consciousness that drew that to you? Right? Blame the patient for their illness because they weren't thinking the right kind of thoughts. Blame the person who happens to be in the way of a drunk driver because they must have been harboring a secret fear of getting into a collision. Blame the soldier who was injured by an improvised explosive device because she was thinking warlike thoughts. Now, of course, I know there are times when what we're thinking or not thinking is directly responsible for our circumstances. That happens. There's a link, say, between chronic anger and stress and things like heart disease and stroke. And yet, I can tell you about several very angry, negative, type A driven people who lived to be a ripe old age and died peacefully in their sleep. So it doesn't always follow, does it? Sometimes we're distracted. Sometimes we're not paying attention. We're not thinking. We make a mistake. Something bad happens. That's our fault. And many times, it's someone else who's distracted, not paying attention. And we just happen to be in the vicinity and we get in the way of their mistake. Of course, I guess, blame it on getting out of bed in the morning, right? Hey, I'm the one who chose to get up this morning. My fault. Sorry. That kind of stuff is going to turn people off, just like the tyrant image god of negative religion. We have to be careful. You know, the only difference is that when we call it positive, we can use a smiley face. And if I thought that that was all that there was to unity, was a smiley face, happy talk, kind of positive spirituality, well, I wouldn't be up here talking. I'd have found something else to do with my life. The reason that I'm a part of this movement is because our positive path, our positive message is more than just a smiley face. Our positive message is an invitation to be authentic. Our positive message says it's okay to feel your feelings, whatever they happen to be, without guilt, without blame. The positive message is that it's okay to be human. And whatever that brings along with it, it's okay to be authentic, whatever it might be. Fear, pain, anger, anxiety. Better to see it and better to own it than to pretend that it doesn't exist. See it, acknowledge it, experience it, and then manage it so that we can master it. We all know that the things that we deny and disown, well, they don't go away, do they? They just go into hiding. And then they can cause problems behind the scenes, and nobody wants that. So a big part of our new understanding is that it doesn't have to be that way. We don't have to destroy it. We don't have to deny it. We don't have to pretend that those things do not exist. Our Unity co-founder, Charles Fillmore, believed that there was this metaphysical idea, or what he would call a perfect pattern for the ideal human being. And he would call that perfect idea the Christ. And the reason he did that was because it was modeled on the life and teachings of Jesus. And it was an idea that was so perfect that it had no room for the kind of things that we've just been talking about that we might tend to label as negative. We tend to forget that in the Gospels we see examples of Jesus experiencing anger, right? Fear, despair, impatience. Oh my goodness, did he get impatient with his disciples because they just didn't get what he was talking about. We see him actually being petty and judgmental. we see him wrestling with all of the things that we label as negative and less than perfect. All of the things that we associate with the ego, the personality, or sometimes what we call the false self. But just because we call it the false self doesn't mean it doesn't exist, or that we can pretend that it doesn't exist. Something can be false because it's incomplete. Something can be false because it doesn't provide the entire picture. So, the personality, the false self, it's not the entire picture. And yet, at a certain level of consciousness, at a certain level in our own evolution as human beings, we're convinced that that's all there is. We see the false self, we see the personality, and we say, that's the whole picture, that's who I really am. And guess what? That's not true, it's false. There's more to us than that. And that's the real purpose of a spiritual path. The spiritual path that we call unity is to help us to get in touch with that part of us that's beyond the personality, what we call the true self, the complete picture. If we're going to use Jesus as an example of a spiritual teacher who shows us how to do that, we have to accept the human part that we see in the Gospels, as well as the divinity that we saw shining through. The message we get is not to deny or suppress those things. We experience them, we master them, and then we let our true nature come shining through. Our new understanding is that Jesus was fully human and fully divine. And the resurrection is really a symbol of that transformation from personality to Christ. Another way of looking at it is the transformation from identifying totally with the personality, the ego, the false self, and letting the true self come forth and run the show. More often anyway. Maybe not all the time. I don't know anyone who is able to let the true self run the show all the time. But more often. More often. What I think sets unity apart from other approaches to spirituality is that we see Jesus as one example of that kind of transformation. We can get a more complete picture when we include the spiritual teachings of other traditions. Buddhists and Hindus have something to offer, and so do the pagan traditions that the Christians tried to absorb and assimilate. You know, one of the problems that I see sometimes with contemporary spirituality, a lot of the New Age spiritual but not religious approaches, is this tendency to embrace anything and everything except Jesus, or anything even remotely associated with the Bible. Doesn't sound very inclusive or enlightened, does it? We want to work with it all. We want to embrace it all. We want to sort things out for ourselves. We can do that. That's how the transformation experience works. People cooperating to figure out a way to get through it all together instead of relying on gurus or authorities and people who claim to have special knowledge, people with these special revelations who want to tell us the way it has to be and what it is that we have to do. In our new understanding, we're learning to make room for the full spectrum of our humanity, because that's what leads to transformation. Our positive path doesn't say that we deny our fear. It says that we feel the fear, take precautions, and we move forward. Or another way that I've heard it said is, we feel the fear and we do it anyway. We acknowledge our anger, and we choose to respond with peace and compassion. We acknowledge our tendency to want to blame, judge, mock, criticize. And we choose to respond in a way that's constructive, in a way that allows people to change and to evolve at their own right and perfect pace. And sometimes we just have to step back and bite our tongue and affirm that that is indeed happening and unfolding. So what we're offering in unity is a way to be positive and authentic. And it's based on the best of what our spiritual traditions around the world have to offer, as well as the new things that we're learning every single generation. And that's so important. We're evolving. And that's a good thing, because it means we get to be around for the long haul, and we get to be a force for good in the world. See you next week.